quilt, to me, when I see it, I see 35 years from the horrors of my friends dropping dead day after day. It's one of the few physical manifestations of the AIDS crisis that I can look at and say, I see the entire story right here.
It's pieces of fabric sewn together representing lives. These were actual people with names, and we wrap them in this caring piece of fabric to let them know that they matter.
And there are people who've probably, like me, never sewed in their entire lives, who decided to make something because they love someone.
The quilt panel we made is for my brother, Peter Vincent Zullo. He was an activist.
My late partner, Kevin Lockwood, he died in 1992, October 1992.
Juanita L. Williams, my mom, my one and only, something we used to do with each other, one and only, one and only. Just loving, giving, caring, and a listener and teacher.
Michael Garcia. I was his mom, his sister, his best friend.
My Uncle John passed the year I was born, and I came out in college, and there was a part of me that wished he had been there.
John was his longest partner. I was his favorite.
It's true. You were his favorite cousin.
And he was my favorite. He's like a spirit guide to me. Just wish he didn't die.
So this was my panel for my best friend named Paul. We grew up together. We came out together. We formed this kind of band of comrades who could help each other through the thick and thin. We just didn't understand how thick it would become. As you may recall, back in the 80s, it was awful. People were dying all the time.
First of all, there were no drugs. There was nothing but nursing your friends to their deaths.
And I would literally not want to pick up the phone because I didn't know who was now dead.
I had never dealt with the deaths.
I couldn't talk about my friends who had died. Nobody would let me talk about them.
It felt like I was going crazy.
One can only endure that level of grief for a certain amount of time.
I just felt like I have got to take this energy and channel it somewhere.
But the idea for the quilt was born on the evening of November 27th, 1985, at the annual tribute to Harvey Milk and George Moscone, who were murdered on November 27th, 1978. As we were approaching that anniversary, the death toll from AIDS in San Francisco reached 1,000.
I happened to go on that march. I was getting off from Macy's, and I had my little dress on and with my little kamali heels, because I used to sell cologne. And we marched all the way down to Market Street. Cleve took us to Market Street.
And he and the organizers of the march asked people to bring placards with the names of people that had died of AIDS. And they pulled ladders out of the bushes, as good activists always have ladders in bushes.
And we climbed up and taped these names to the wall. And I looked back at this patchwork of names on the wall, and I thought that could be some kind of strange quilt. And I thought, oh, that's it. That's the perfect symbol. And everybody told me it was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard of.
On a June day in 1987, somebody I'd been dating once called, and he was then dating some guy named Cleve Jones, who had a crazy idea for a quilt. And we had a nice civilized dinner at which he sold me on the concept.
We decided to hold a public meeting, so I reserved a room at the Women's Building.
I was going to bring my panels down and give them to them. And I remember the way that Mike Smith he took the 2 panels from me and he patted them. And I just kind of said, God, I want to be a part of this. I have to have more.
I think that she was really the first person to understand the power of this project, that this might heal people's hearts. I think that was the part that I underestimated and that Gert understood fully.
In the summer of 1987, I was walking past Mary's Bar in Houston, Texas. And in the back patio of the bar, there were people with bed sheets and painting names and their dates of death and their birth dates. They were talking about the people. I could see healing. I could see laughter. They were crying. And until that point, it was the numbers. The numbers were rolling in. And I went, this makes sense. This is something I can understand.
People began showing up from other parts of the country and other parts of the world.
Many of us simply walked in off the street. I came from Macworld magazine. It was an opportunity for us to work through the grief, the anger, the despair, and to create this community of like-minded people.
It was remarkable the way the community built this quilt that first summer of 1987.
The hardest part of making the panel was walking into the room. I wasn't sure if I was going to fall apart. I wasn't sure if I would turn around and say, no, I just can't do that.
I had been sitting on the fact that he had died several years before, so it had been weighing on me, like, how do we mark his death? But at the same time, I didn't want to make this panel because it would have created a finality that up until that moment, I didn't realize how much I needed.
For about 11 years, I didn't socialize. And the only time that I actually did was when we made the quilt. That breath came back into me.
I am a queen, but I am not a seamstress. I have never sewed anything in my entire life.
It was like, now what? I'm going to take a class in quilt making.
I'm like, okay, how am I going to encapsulate this gigantic person in this little space?
We always said, tell the story of the person. Tell us what was meaningful to that person. And I don't know why an air conditioning vent would have been meaningful to somebody, but we have a quilt section with an air conditioning vent on it.
They sold these leopard print sheets at Walmart. Now, my friend I know would just be beside himself by the fact that his quilt got purchased from Walmart.
There was supposed to be pink flamingos on there, and they ended up with ducks. So, as long as he doesn't strike me down, I'm good.
And for me, the most important part of the panel was what I put in letters at the bottom. And it says, if love could keep me alive, I would live forever. If love could have kept him alive, he would have lived forever. But it didn't.
I remember calling up my best friend and saying, Gretchen, it's time to make this quilt, and I don't know what to do. And she said, put me on speakerphone, and we'll stay up all night, and we will sew. And we did.
Nearly every panel is a collaboration. And I think that's one of the joys of this is it is something that people can gather together to do and not be isolated in your grief.
And so I started talking to Sheila and other people about the quilt and how, because Bert was so community oriented, how to involve a whole lot of people in this process.
And so we called all of our friends and we had them write letters and we had them fax them. In those days we were faxing. Fax them to the hotel, and I put the letters inside each of the pieces of fabric with his name.
We did one panel, me and my grandchildren did one panel, and my children, the handprints, the rainbow handprints.
Yeah, and that was definitely in the spirit of Anita too.
Yes, because none of us did crafting.
And she would always get the kids together and be, okay, we're sitting down, we're doing something together. So
Right.
it's like you took up that baton and telling them to do that.
Right, we had fun. It made it colorful.
His favorite color was teal, like on the blue-green spectrum. And a world map really lends itself to a lot of blue-green. So the idea of inviting people to contribute a swatch, a piece of cloth, and in the end, we got over 100, actually 108 pieces of cloth from 6 different countries.
It's still emotional to me now because I'm bringing them back.
Probably the most important reason for me making the panel, I think it was for me to have more moments with Kevin. I know that sounds crazy.
The making of the quilt helps the grief process and the collaboration around it and the love and the sadness and the whole stuff that went into it is in the quilt.
When Michael was inducted, we had to leave him behind. And that was the hardest part, I think, of the whole thing.
It felt like I was leaving Kevin again.
It's almost like giving her life away from me again.
I thought I was going to feel like clutching it, like, no, don't take it. But I felt remarkably calm. I think because I knew it was ready.
A major historical event took place in October of 1987, and that was the second gay lesbian march on Washington, D.C. for rights, human rights.
But they didn't have an AIDS component to it. Suddenly there was some urgency to Cleve's idea, and there was a deadline. Human beings love deadlines. I guess it got to be about Labor Day, with about a month to go, and we were like, oh, the mall is a huge place, and there are going to be 1 million people at this march, and we're going to have this thing that looks like a postage stamp. There was a rough week or two there of, okay, we didn't do it. We don't have the momentum.
Cleve, he went to go pick up his mail, and they said, is Mr. Jones come for his mail? And he goes, yes. He goes, well, did he bring a truck?
We had, over 3 days, almost 1,000 pieces of overnight mail from mothers all across the country. And they were so desperate and so lonely for connection that they mailed them off to a bunch of gay men in San Francisco who they didn't even know. And the responsibility we felt when we started opening those. A responsibility, but also overwhelming joy. We had wanted to do this to connect with the country, to be heard. And suddenly we found all these allies everywhere. There was a sense of relief of, okay, this is going to succeed. This is large enough that it's going to make a statement.
So that morning on October 1987, it was damp and it was cold. And they gave us all maps, and it told where the panel was going to be that you made. So I was literally standing at the edge of the walkway and very nervous about it. My friend kept saying, Michael, calm down. It's going to be right here. And I remember bursting in sort of frustration, saying, you trust a bunch of homosexuals from San Francisco? But when the panel opened, I burst into tears. That was the first time I ever cried from the moment of Troy's death. And this older woman reached her arms around me and said to me, "My son's next to your friend." And that to me told me, we have a memorial.
We had almost 2,000 panels. It took up the entire city block in front of the Hirshhorn Museum, right smack in the middle of the mall, which meant everybody literally walked through the quilt on those walkways to get to the stage for the rally.
But when we got to the quilt, it was silent. And all you would hear was a sob, or just a quiet whispering.
And as they came out the other end, they would pick it up again down there. But we didn't have any big signs that said, "Shh, quiet." The reverence of it was so obvious.
I don't know if I'd ever seen something so beautiful and something so that spoke to me as a gay man at the time, knowing people who were dying or who had died.
It was profound. I felt like I could see my friends watching over me.
And it did exactly what we wanted. It made AIDS a part of that march.
I think every one of us knew by the time we got back to San Francisco that our lives had been changed forever by this experience.
I came back, I had seen the baby Jesus. All I wanted was to be with the quilt.
The letters started pouring in from everywhere. And every letter was different, but they all said, you have no idea how bad it is where we live and how many people are dying and how awful the response is. Would you bring the quilt to our community?
And we just said, okay, this is going to be our work for a few years. And after a few years, I'm like, this is going to be my life's work.
The most pivotal year for the AIDS Memorial Quilt was 1996.
The original vision, if you will, was of the quilt covering the mall, and it covered the entire mall. And that was just the most extraordinary experience of my life.
And that would have been 44,000 panels. It was humongous. It was all 5 city blocks all the way down the mall. Almost overwhelming, but I believe that we had over 3 million people that showed up there.
It was the first time a president of the United States walked on the quilt.
And I remember that my plane flew over the mall and that the view from the sky made it what it was. It was this burial ground of thousands of lives. And I got it at that moment. At that moment, I got Cleve's vision.
When I made the panel, it didn't feel like activism. It was a personal act.
When you work on your panel, that particular panel is your sole focus, and you're not necessarily thinking of it within context of these tens of thousands of other panels. And then, of course, you see it and you realize you're just one tiny fraction of this great world tragedy and pandemic.
I think there's lots of different kinds of activism. And the physical process of creating a quilt, in this case, a 3 foot by 6 foot, the size of where you bury someone, right? To take up that kind of space sends a message.
It revolutionized really what panel making was, what quilting meant to people.
It made activists out of lovers, parents, siblings.
The quilt, everywhere it goes, it's on the front line showing people what happened and that we are still suffering from the effects of HIV.
HIV and AIDS is not going away. It's prevalent, the bullying and everything else that goes on.
There are lives that are still lost, lives that are Black and brown, people living in the southern United States.
That's the most mind-boggling thing, is that 35 years ago this was happening, to where people were just going home and passing away. But again, in the South, these are just the realities. And I would love to make a panel for my friend Jonathan. He did pass March of 2021. He did have HIV/AIDS complications, but it was essentially due to not having insurance. I do remember that there was a conversation with his mother. She was like, oh, no, that's for rich white people. Beyond disheartening.
It's a social justice issue for us to end the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and quilting is a way to bring generations together around a cause that is so important.
James Bryson, Blaine Cunningham.
The display that we just recently had here in June 2022 was the exact same size as the very first year, 1,920 panels.
One of the reasons this was such a powerful experience is that I had never seen my partner's panel displayed since the day I made it and turned it in.
I'm so grateful that I got to open up his panel. I felt tremendous guilt that I wasn't there. I felt like all I did was abandon him. And there was something in that moment of putting it down on the ground. I just sort of touched him, and I felt like we made peace with each other. Like, I felt like him saying, like, it's okay.
It was sad, but yet knowing that he was being acknowledged, it was wonderful.
My mom on 8 panels is amazing.
There was just this heartbreak that I felt in the air, that I felt was really palpable, and this celebration of all these lives.
So many people came, and you saw grandmothers putting blankets out on the ground next to the quilts that they had made and telling the story to their grandkids and great-grandkids.
This young girl was carrying flowers, and she saw me crying over my partner's panel, and she stopped and she took a flower out of her hand and she laid it on Kevin's panel. I know she wasn't even around during this era, and she was paying honor to my late partner.
So I think its power continues.
And it continues to evolve. Each time someone adds a panel, each time someone sends in a letter, the wedding rings, the photographs, this entire archive, we're adding to this cultural, historic record of life in the age of AIDS.
As Julie wrote.
And ultimately, what became quite apparent when I sat down with the folks at the Library of Congress was that the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress was the ideal partner alongside the National AIDS Memorial to care for all of this material.
And after all those years of fighting the Reagan administration to even get noticed, to have somebody say, this is valuable, these lives are valuable, your own government wants to preserve them. Amazing.
When we started this, Gert and I were furious, and we are still furious. But I also want you to know that in my heart, thanks to this quilt, all that hate and fear and despair has been replaced. And for me, this quilt is the physical embodiment of love and courage and hope.